In February of 2022, a woman in Kharkiv packed a bag. She had maybe an hour, maybe less. She didn't really know. She was not packing for a trip. She was packing because life had taken a very terrible turn. She took documents that she needed. She took a charger. She took one change of clothes for each child, and one thing that made no practical sense whatsoever. For some, it would have been an old photograph. Others, a wooden spoon handed down to them by their mother, and still others an old book in a language that they never read. Everybody took something like this, and if you ask any of them, they'll tell you what it was. That was 4 years ago. The woman still hasn't been home since. Germany has taken in more Ukrainian refugees than any other country in Europe since the attacks from Russia first began. More than 1.3 million as of this year. Around 5.6 million Ukrainians remain abroad, and Germany holds about 23% of them, the largest share anywhere. Germany has taken more Ukrainian refugees than any other country in Europe since the attacks from Russia first began. More than 1.3 million as of this year. About 5.6 million Ukrainians remain abroad, and Germany holds about 23% of them. That's the largest share anywhere. And it's worth remembering what the world looked like when all of this first began. Germany announced its plan to roll back COVID restrictions on February 16th of 2020, with the Freedom Day being scheduled for March 20th. At that time, Germany had the largest case count of their entire pandemic, coming in right around March of 2020. That was 230,000 cases. And that's when the first wave of Ukrainians was arriving. So the largest refugee movement in Europe since 1945 came into a country that was, at that same time, still counting its worst infection numbers ever, while simultaneously trying to declare that the whole thing was over. The volunteers who met the trains had spent 2 years in masks. The job center staff, the school administrators, the pediatricians, the nurses, the housing officers, all of them had just come through the most institutionally exhausting period in most of living memory. And then the buses started arriving. We all remember the hectic nature of who said what and who to trust, what dates were still going to be on the calendar, and what that meant for shifting goalposts at the time. And that's not a judgment statement. Standards and timetables and restrictions changed as the data started to come in. Put Freedom Day on the calendar all you want, the numbers were still at an all-time high. None of the support workers, the nurses, the therapists, the police, the firefighters, or just the good-hearted citizens could know the future. And yet, despite not being able to do so, and still being in the global event that will define a generation, they opened their doors and put in the hard work anyway. The people who met those first trains had just spent 2 years doing crisis work. They went straight from one into the next without anything in between. And of those refugees, roughly 70% to 75% of registered Ukrainian refugees are women or children. Children under the age of 18 make up about 31%, adult women about 40%. If we read between the lines, that means that the men stayed. Conscription age, most of them still inside a war that even at time of recording still doesn't have a realistic end in sight. So what crossed the border wasn't families, it was half families. Mothers with children and no husband. Wives who now FaceTime a man who may or may not answer. And Germany, to its credit, opened the doors at the beginning. Housing, healthcare, schooling, the legal right to work from day one. And that's not how most refugee systems around the rest of the world actually work. And by all measures that we usually see, what they did worked. Ukrainians hit a 50% employment rate at about 2.5 years. And that's faster than the 2015 wave of refugees who took 6 years to get to that same mark. Among those who had arrived in the first months of the war, employment went from 16% in late 2022 to 51% by the end of summer 2025. That is a success story, genuinely, and it's something Germany should be proud of. And I want you to hold on to that, because it's about to get complicated. Here's the thing that nobody really talks about when it comes to generosity and philanthropy. it has a shelf life. 4 years is long enough for a country to get tired. That doesn't mean that they're being cruel, it just means tired. And Germany's tiredness has started to show up in their law. Ukrainians after March 31st, 2025 no longer receive the same citizens allowance that earlier arrivals got. They're now on the same footing as asylum seekers from anywhere else. Then, this July, the whole system got changed again. The citizens allowance was replaced with stricter income-based programs with tighter monitoring of savings and assets and housing. For a single person, the new arrivals payment was 441 euros a month, roughly 120 euros less than those who came before. The effect is less money, narrower access to healthcare in the early years, and more pressure to find work with fewer support services to help you find that work. Now, I'm not saying that Germany is doing it wrong. Countries have budgets and priorities and voters and constituents and limits. And 4 years of anything can wear that goodwill really thin. That's just basic math. But I want you to feel what that does to a person on the receiving end. Because you did not choose to come to this country. You cannot rightly choose whether to stay or not. And now the ground under you, which was never really solid to begin with, starts to shift yet again. And you get to find out that welcoming had an expiration date, and nobody bothered to tell you that. So what does that world actually look like from inside the life of a refugee? Well, let's start with work. Across Europe, nearly 60% of Ukrainian refugees are working below their skill level. These are not unskilled people, these are highly educated people. And a woman who, for example, was a school principal in Mariupol is stocking shelves in Dortmund. And she is grateful for the job, but something is withering inside all the same. And then there's language. Local language proficiency is one of the strongest predictors of whether someone will work at all. So you spend your evenings learning German, that's after your shift, after you put the kids down at 45 years old when your brain is not working the same way that it used to. And all the while, the horrors of war dominate your feed on your phone. Then we have childcare. Most Ukrainian refugees in Germany are women with children, often single mothers, because the men couldn't leave. Access to childcare determines whether employment is even possible. There is no one to take the kids. There is no grandmother down the hall or down the street. She's still in Zaporizhia. You hope. But when was the last time that you heard from her? Now, the PTSD numbers do come down, and thank God for that. People within the first year typically have those numbers fall, and they fall hard. But just because a diagnosis clears does not mean that the life is in repair. 9 months into the war, researchers compared 3 groups of Ukrainians. Ones who never left, ones who were internally displaced, and then refugees who made it out. High stress ran at about 15% among those who stayed, at about 22% among the internally displaced, and at about 25% among those who reached safety. The people who escaped were doing worse than people that were still under fire. What drives that? Well, researchers found that watching an attack footage of what's going on at home on your phone or online was on that list, and of course it was. But 2 other things came in at nearly the same weight: not having enough money and being alone in the country that took you in. Which means everything that we just talked about, the benefits cuts, the job you can't get with the degree that you already have, and the childcare that doesn't exist, all add up to a life that is being lived in isolation and on the brink, often inside your own head, even if you're in the diaspora of refugees. So what do you do with a situation like that? You sit with them, and you let them tell you their story. November 2nd through the 10th, I'll be in Germany as part of a hand-picked team from Colorado Christian University's School of Counseling. In addition to working with clinical staff, on the ground we'll be working with large groups, small groups, and couples. Men and women whose marriage has survived separation and displacement and 4 years without a single ordinary day. I want to be honest with you about what 9 days is really worth. 9 days will not fix a war. It will not undo the last 4 years. If I came home and I told you that I'd healed anybody, I would expect you to stop trusting anything that I say. But if we train people who stay, the ones who speak the language, the ones who live there, the ones who will still be living there in 2030, then the work doesn't leave when my plane does. You know, the old stories, they all have a common shape to them. Somebody comes in out of the weather with nothing but their name, and the household is measured by what happens next. 1.5 million times over, Germany has answered the door, and the answering has cost them something, and it's costing them more every day. I'm going to help carry a little bit of it. And then I'm going to teach some people to keep carrying it after I'm gone in ways that maybe they haven't tried before. The total is $4,500, and at time of recording, I'm already about a quarter of the way there. And thank you to those who generously gave. Sincerely and truly from the heart, thank you. But I still have a ways to go, and that's why I need your help. Since word about this came into the American sphere, millions of people have said, I want to help, but I don't know how. And what can I do? I don't have any skills that would be useful, or access, or time. Well, this is your chance to confidently say, I did what I could when the chance came around. And if this is something that you want a hand in, the links and all the information are going to be below. And if you've made it this far into a video about someone else's war, you're already the kind of person that I was hoping to find.